wants to see repeated again. And we started an intense period of collaboration. As I say, I think that has yielded a lot of positive fruit for commuters on both systems. Obviously, selfishly, I'm hyper-focused on NJ Transit. And just to give you a little bit of a sense of what's happened last year, and Tony will, I'm sure, address this, Amtrak spent specifically on areas that are germane to this relationship, $12 million, 3.5 miles of new catenary, replacement of more than 9,500 hardware components, inspection of all catenary wires from Trenton to New York City, including by helicopter, increased pantograph inspections on both systems, with more to come. And then right now, I think, Tony, I don't want to speak for you, this fiscal year looks like another up from that. I think you mentioned $40 million. Mm-hmm. In particular, that's the fiscal year, but in particular, a 12-week intense period right now with work being done between the two systems to get that work out of the way before the summer heat hits us. You'll recall there's a consensus that heat and the component parts don't get along terribly well. So being preemptive, anticipating that, has been a big part of the partnership, as opposed to only reacting to challenges. Another step that's been agreed upon, which I think is quite notable, that in the dispatch room in Penn Station, NJ Transit will now have a senior member of its team right alongside the Amtrak folks. And that, particularly at busy times, at special events, that will be a huge boost, and I want to thank the Amtrak side, Roger in particular, for making that happen to allow us to have that senior presence in the control center. And we have a lot coming up, period, in New Jersey and in the region, but in particular in the warm weather. So MetLife has a record concert schedule this spring and summer. We have the first ever World Club Cup in soccer, where we've got 9 matches, including a quarterfinal, both semis, and the final at MetLife. We have the World Cup itself next summer, 8 matches, including the final, which will be the most witnessed, bless you, event in human history. So this partnership and the timeliness of the partnership could not be more important to either organization. Again, I want to thank both teams for that spirit of partnership. This is as far from a blame game as you can imagine right now. Facts are facts, but this is the spirit of coming up with a better customer and commuter experience, as good an experience as possible. Before I turn to Tony, I'll make 2 comments. Notwithstanding the progress, the specific steps that have been taken, the spirit of partnership, that doesn't mean a train's not going to break down tomorrow. So it's very hard to bat 1,000 in this line of business. But having said that, my last point, I think we all agree, if the exact same set of facts were presented to us this summer as were presented last summer in terms of weather and what broke down and where it broke down, we would have a meaningfully better commuter experience this summer. That gives you some sense. We can't bat 1,000 on the one hand, but on the other hand, a lot of progress has been made that would have a tangible and specific impact positively on the commuter experience going forward. Again, I want to thank both sides, and with that, turn things over to the chairman of Amtrak, Tony Kosher. Tony? You have to shut these off, I apologize.
It's okay. Thank you, Governor, and let me begin by thanking the Governor for his leadership on getting us to this meeting, getting us to this point of creating that kind of focus. I mean, the reality is that I could spend a lot of time talking about the challenges that we have, the challenges of having, you know, the 400 trains a day that use this system, the challenges of the 200,000 people who commute every day, the challenges of a legacy system that has been in place in some cases for 50, 60, even 100-year assets that we're relying on. But that's all sort of irrelevant to the commuter who every day gets on a train and expects to, in a very safe, reliable way, get from one point to another. I think this session is about reminding everyone and sort of reporting to everyone on a tremendous amount of work that's taken place between Amtrak and New Jersey Transit on trying to do the best we can to assure that everyone has that safe, reliable commute. And then we don't experience, as the governor mentioned, the issues that we had last year. We've made a lot of progress. We've made a lot of progress in terms of creating a whole new regimen of inspecting assets. The best way to deal with an asset that's old and has the risk of not performing is to identify it before that failure takes place and to fix it. The best way of being able to do that involves finding the best state-of-the-art technologies that are available to make that inspection as meaningful as possible, and we've done all of those things. As the governor mentioned, we have replaced almost 7,500 components around the system. We've replaced catenary wire. We've done a tremendous amount of work to try to upgrade it. All of this is sort of a challenge, as I mentioned, to a system that is old and a system that has a number of points of potential failure in it, all of which we've worked really hard to try to address in advance so that we could remedy that. You know, the thing about all of this is that there is no sort of magic manual here. There isn't sort of an identified set of principles that if we all follow them, every single train that we run will run on time. Right now, New Jersey Transit is running at a 90% on-time rate on our railroad. We're hopeful we can keep that up and we can continue it. And as the weather becomes uncooperative, we hope that we've found ways to address it. But we have no way of assuring that and guaranteeing it. So what we have done is we've put in place mechanisms that allow us to invest, and the governor mentioned that we are now on a path to invest over $50 million in those day-to-day upgrades of replacing aged catenary wire, replacing other mechanical components on the system. We've also developed a way of being able to respond much more quickly when an incident happens. People have a reason to expect that when they hear about a failure of a train, that we're not sort of sitting around waiting for a period of time for crews to respond, for people to deploy assets necessary to do that. We've upped our game in terms of being able to do all of that. But also, as the governor mentioned, there is no way that we could guarantee that we're not going to have issues going forward, but we have done an incredible amount of work between the two entities of trying to make sure that we can manage that in the best way possible. I'll say this too, that, you know, just as I said there's no manual here, there are a lot of good ideas out there about how to run the system better. There are lots of concepts out there about things that have been done both in this region and around the world where people have had to deal with legacy systems and come up with creative ways of trying to solve some of those problems. We are open to that, and we have to all remain open to that. We have to all remain open to making the system better and better every single day. And so with that, Governor, I will turn it back to you and to Chris.
Before Chris jumps in, Tony, thank you. By the way, all of us basically had to walk across the street or walk down the hall to be at this meeting. I want to reiterate, these 5 folks run a national rail system, and the fact that they're taking the time, not just day in and day out, to be in New Jersey today means a lot. I'm getting back to my regular pattern of taking NJ Transit. I took a couple of days ago, Chris, on time. I had one of the new window seats. Right. I could see actually outside. Incredibly pleasant experience. Over to you.
Thank you, Governor, and for your leadership, and thanks for the feedback. And Tony and Roger, thanks for the partnership and the collaborative effort that we're all undertaking. Governor, if I could, I want to frame what I want to say within the context of perhaps preparation in our response. As Tony said, we have 72% of our rail commuters going to New York every single day. That is about 144,000 daily trips that happen. For those folks, they care about on-time performance. They care about making sure they get home and to work in a safe and efficient manner. That is our singular obsession. So what we've been trying to do since last summer is to focus on making sure we get to our reliable system. So I wanted to just talk to you about a few things that are ongoing and a long-range plan. In the first instance, just starting in March and for the next till June 1st, Amtrak has requested outages from us to make sure they can make the necessary catenary improvements. That is happening. It's already happening on the Raritan Valley line. It's going to happen on other segments of the Northeast Corridor, and that's a good thing. We internally understand that the mechanical systems of our rail rolling stock are also need to be conditioned properly to handle the summer months. So we're working on a preventive inspection and a maintenance program to make sure those component parts that are susceptible to heat can be maintained properly, and should the temperature of those systems go up, we will monitor them and resolve the problem before it starts. Equally important, we already have in place, since last summer, ProTech crews, which we work with Amtrak very closely, that are located at various important parts of the Northeast Corridor. So should there be a problem, the response time to manage the problem is a lot shorter than it was last summer. You talked about dispatch and the senior level staff that's going to be in the control center. This is an important, was an important objective for us, and I'm so appreciative of your leadership, Governor, and Tony and Roger for working with us. Ultimately, we care about on-time performance for Amtrak as much as we do for ours. So this, we think, is a mutually beneficial program. Let me talk about communications for a second. One of the things that you emphasized in my very first meeting with you is the need to make sure we communicate in real time and with a frequency that the customer has not been used to. We already do that in coordination with Amtrak. Every time there's a problem on our system, we tell them exactly what the root cause of the problem is, and if possible, how long it's going to take to fix it. And we do that on all platforms across our platforms, and we do the same thing with Amtrak. We also, on top of that, have ambassadors who are in person at Newark and in New York, who are there in the mornings and in the afternoon rush hour, so a customer can speak to somebody in person to understand what's happening on the railroads so they can get real-time information. Let me just end with this last point. Ultimately, the way you get to a reliability of the system is what you committed to in your budget address. You said by the time you leave office, you'll fully modernize the entire fleet, and that is exactly what's about to happen over the next several months. Before your term is up, Governor, we will have taken action with Chairman O'Connor at the lead at the New Jersey Transit Board to make sure we have the authorization to modernize the entire rail fleet by 2031. That has never happened in the 45 years of New Jersey transit history, and you'll be the first governor to do it. And that is how you get to a reliability that our customers are asking for and that you have demanded. Thank you, Governor.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you. And by the way, thank you for those comments and leadership on the NJ Transit team. Fair to say you all are upgrading your entire rolling stock, is that right? Yeah.
Got to get that timing down. Yes, we are in the largest procurement of rolling stock, and we have at this point, mostly through the benefit of the Infrastructure Act funding that we were able to receive, we will be upgrading virtually every piece of rolling stock in the Amtrak system, beginning with the new Acellas, hopefully this spring, and continuing with the Aero system, which will replace the sort of workhorse regional trains that everyone rides on. But, you know, within the next 5 to 10 years, every piece of rolling stock in the Amtrak system will be replaced.
And we announced 200-something buses, clean, state-of-the-art buses last week. So with that, we'll take any questions that you may have. I'll ask Tony to comment on that because this is largely Amtrak infrastructure, but the fact that they're spending between last year, we might want to cut that, Martel, if you could, between last year and this year, $52 million on very specific, very desperately needed upgrades, and NJ Transit spending significant capital on their side is certainly a start. But I think Tony made the point when we gathered the two times before, these are decades-long underinvestments that Amtrak is pushing back against, and I'll let him take it from there.
The reality is, and what the governor just mentioned is what we're facing, which is that the passenger rail infrastructure that exists in the United States is a classic industrial asset that, you know, has been underinvested for decades, and only within the last 10 years have we started to make significant investments. And in fact, I'd say only in the last 5 years have those investments started to ramp up. And the truth is that, we still have a long list of things that need to be invested in to create a state of good repair that creates the level of reliability that we think all of our passengers, expect and should be able to expect. But we are sort of attacking each of those one at a time. In the interim, what is really, really important is that we're smart about the investments that we're making, that we are investing the resources we have, even if they are limited, in the ways that will have the biggest impact and have the longest effect. We do feel optimistic that right now there is a consensus around wanting to make these investments, and it is really up to us to make them as prudently as possible to continue to encourage that to happen. I know a lot of you were around for this, but the governor was a very early and very effective supporter of the Portal Bridge. And so the Portal Bridge is a project that in and of itself will end up replacing a significant segment of the catenary and sort of traditional infrastructure that trains between New York and New Jersey rely on. So that one project is in and of itself going to have a meaningful impact on the reliability of the railroad infrastructure that people use, because it's the kind of asset renewal that really has a lasting impact, as opposed to what we do try to do, which is find those specific areas where we think there's a vulnerability and replace those components of it. Things like the Portal Bridge, Gateway program, those are projects that are going to have a lasting impact. And if we are good stewards and we're able to see those investments through, the experience that people will have using rail infrastructure a decade from now will be very different from what existed a decade ago.
Multi-billion. We're hoping to cut a ribbon before we hang up our cleats, and Gateway is, Chris ran it, even since the last time we had one of these little mini summits. There's been a lot of really good progress on the Hudson River Tunnel project. Sorry about that.
Okay. Can you speak more to the outages that are coming in a little more detail about which lines are going to be impacted? Is it weekend? Is it overnight? Is it both? And then the second part to that question is, I know Amtrak has had challenges with force account work and having workers available. So, as transit is able to give you those outages, are you going to have enough people working to get, the full impact of those?
Let's go to Chris and then maybe Roger on the Amtrak side.
So what we intended, just like we did on Raritan Valley, we're working with Amtrak on making sure specific lines, to the extent that they need outages from us, we not only agree together, but we tell the customers 3-4 weeks in advance. So, Colleen, what we intend to do is publish a list of all the outages we are planning between now and the first week in June, well in advance, so our customers know. And we're happy to identify the specific lines in that.
Good afternoon. Yes, we've been working very closely with New Jersey Transit to work on those outages. As part of that, ensuring that we did have the force account as well as the materials ready so that we can do that work productively and effectively. It started last week and it's already off to a very strong start, so we feel really good about the plan that we've collectively developed and our ability to achieve all of the work that we have planned.
Sorry, Laura, you have the manpower you need?
Have it dedicated for this work.
Amtrak is going to close one of the tubes for the East River Tunnel, which will last like 3 years. A lot of people in New York are upset because 25% of Albany service will be canceled, 10% of Long Island inbound service. No service is currently canceled on NJT, but what I've been told by people at Long Island Railroad is the operational flexibility to get trains in and out of Sunnyside, your trains, is going to be reduced when you have 3 tubes running instead of 4. And should there be a signal problem or an equipment failure, right now they adjust 15 minutes with 4 tubes. If you have a signal failure or equipment failure with 3 tubes at rush hour, it could make it a much hairier situation. And are you concerned about that? A lot of politicians in New York are telling Amtrak, please don't do the closure yet. Find another way.
I'm going to turn, Governor, if it's okay, I'm going to have Jimmy answer the specific question on timing. But let me just, Michael, I want to address this broader issue. I understand that these outages take a lot of time and they do inconvenience some people. But I must say, these repairs aren't a luxury, they're a necessity. The Amtrak is doing it because it's the right thing to do. If we don't do it, you're going to have a potential catastrophic incident and choke off the entire system. So this idea that somehow these repairs will magically happen without inconveniencing people. Well, and look, I mean, I will tell you, as somebody who's worked very closely with our team and Amtrak to coordinate the scheduling of the East River Tunnel construction, I feel like they have understood what the needs of the railroads are, and they're doing what is necessary. But this broader point about infrastructure improvements, I just don't understand from a pragmatic standpoint how anybody could be opposed to a repairing of a tunnel that is 120 years old.
Jimmy, you want to?
I think you covered it, right? I mean, trying to repair on this type of infrastructure, we can let Amtrak speak to it, under traffic and open for rail service would be nearly impossible. We've been working with Amtrak for months, developing a plan that is very robust system and new switches to speak to it a little bit. Gary?
I mean, first I want to say, you're not going to modernize the asset unless you do take it out of service and do the work on it. We do have plans. We're working through plans right now, and we're going to meet with the Long Island next week, in fact, to talk over the operational issues while that tube's out of service. It is going to be very tricky. It is going to be challenging. And just as you said, things will happen in one of those other three tunnels. But we will be prepared to address it quickly so it impacts everybody to the least amount.
Yeah, I just wanted to add one final thing, which is that to say this, that before I read my daily news this morning, I already sort of had the sort of notion that what we're doing at the East River Tunnel is likely to inconvenience a lot of people. I think Chris and Jimmy and Gary have all said it well. Based on everything that we know, I'm not sure we have a lot of options, and I think there's a whole nother problem that happens by us not taking action. But there is not a day that goes by that those of us who have a leadership position at Amtrak don't revisit our assumptions to make sure that they are accurate or can be improved, or whether there are operational mitigation things we can take into place relative to inconveniencing people less. It is a very difficult problem to wake up after 40 years and say we need to fix this. But, you know, as I said, you know, I don't want anyone to think that these decisions are made and then we sort of put them to bed and just move on. Every day we're revisiting whether or not there's something we missed. Every day we're revisiting, is there a way we can stage things a little bit differently to make it less of a burden on people? And, you know, and that will continue. That will continue.
Are you revisiting the idea that the MTA used for the L train to repair it nights and weekends?
That and everything else is on the table, yes. Yes.
Given the Trump administration sometimes aggressive reallocation of resources, what money are you counting on and can it be counted on?
By the way, I'm not used to everyone else getting the questions. I'm having a very good time here.
How about red zones?
That's a guy from Needham, Massachusetts. Ignore him.
Question for...
Hold on.
Yeah, I can only answer your question broadly, which is to say that, you know, Amtrak has a lot of capital projects that are in the queue, and we've been working very productively with the new administration on advancing those forward. And, you know, I don't really, you know, I mean, is there more of a need for there to be investment in infrastructure, particularly passenger rail infrastructure in the United States? You know, Amtrak as a company believes the answer to that question is yes. We've shared that with Congress for as long as I've been affiliated with Amtrak, and our hope is that we can continue to make that case and people will be receptive to investing in it. But if your question is, has the new administration been supportive of our initiatives, I think the answer is yes. I mean, like any new administration, I think they've wanted to be comfortable that the decisions we're making are accurate and that the investments we're making are prudent. But yes, I'd say that they have been supportive. Sorry.
I would just add to that selfishly, Secretary Duffy lives in New Jersey, and that's been Fran and I have gotten to know him well, in our case, unfortunately, because of abandoned mine shafts and sinkholes, but he's been very supportive, and I want to say that publicly. Larry. No, hold on. Please. Your quotient was 2, by the way.
One for Amtrak. For Amtrak, what percentage?
Yeah, we'll have to get you that information from a percentage standpoint. I don't think we have it today.
Locomotives.
Yeah, so we have 216 locomotives right now, and of which we have 45 new ones or 35 new ones we've just received, and we'll continue to evaluate them, Larry, just to make sure that we are on track to modernize them as well. That's very much part of the governor's modernization program for the entire fleet.
So about 15%.
Modernize the entire rail fleet?
The 2031, the entire rail fleet will be modernized.
Do you anticipate having another summit before the summer season gets underway?
Probably not unless there is a reason to have it. We all know each other. We all know how to find each other. I think the plan has been laid out. But if if circumstances are great, I don't think we'll just come together to say how great things are. But if there are challenges, we all reserve the right to gather if need be. Please.
With the exception of some of the people at this end of the table, I think that summit takes place on almost a daily basis. So, will everyone around this table convene in this form again? I think the governor's right. Maybe not. I mean, we're already midway through April. But know that the very senior people in both organizations that you see around this table, they talk to each other all the time about this very topic.
Very good point. Please.
Are you expecting construction costs to rise for these renovations due to tariffs, and if so, which projects might be at risk?
I'll give you a general answer, and maybe these folks can follow up with you offline in terms of numbers. It'd be pretty surprising if the answer to that wasn't yes. I think that we're going to see that across the board, not just in construction projects or just in the rail venue. If these go forward, my gut tells me that's unavoidable.
Governor, is there an off-topic question I could ask?
Yeah, but did you have one more on? Yeah, I'll come back to you.
We're from the same hometown.
Don't hold that against us.
Governor Hochul has ruled out the Penn expansion project, Block 780 and South. How do you see that, any of you, impacting Gateway, which is still going to do resiliency and redundancy, but how do you get an additional car, additional passengers, an additional train without 780, which she says is not going to happen?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just give you a general answer. Maybe, Chris, you ran Gateway, you should answer, and Tony should weigh in. I believe personally expansion is, to the premise of your question, is important. I think even more so than renovation, although we're supportive of both. But if you're going to go through all this trouble of building these two new tunnels and making the investments that we're making, you want to see the capacity be able to meet the demand at that point. Chris, why don't you weigh in? And
Yes, sir. So a couple of points on this. One is the way you get to 48 trains an hour ultimately is by an expansion plan. The FRA, through an EIS process, was going to consider or is considering 3 alternatives that included Block 780, as you correctly said. But that doesn't mean the EIS has completed. It hasn't even started yet, as I understand it. So there are multiple options that the EIS process will go through to identify an expansion plan that fits into both the governor's vision of what an expansion looks like. Ultimately, expansion is the only way you get to 48 trains an hour, and that's why these 2 tunnels that GDC is building is so essential to this entire region.
Tony, you want to add anything?
Only to say that, again, and I'm probably going to repeat myself because it's a common theme to all of it, we're reversing, a 100-year backlog in this case. And so getting 2 new tunnels under the Hudson River, replacing a 120-year-old asset with a new one, is going to, in and of itself, create the opportunity for us to, in fact, support resiliency and strengthen the capacity that comes from having fewer outages and all the things that we've talked about, but also create the opportunity for expansion. Now, what form that expansion takes place, and whether it's what's been discussed relative to the 780 block or any of the other alternatives, I think that is still a work in progress. And again, as I said before, it is important that we listen to the concerns that people raise. It's important that we adjust to the way we plan on doing this based on factors that change and the environment that changes, and all of that is going to go into a determination as to how to best redevelop existing Penn Station that we all believe should be done and create the level of capacity that hopefully the completion of the Gateway program is going to afford to New York. What we do know is that rail capacity to New York City through a artery that is the only connection between New York City and the rest of the continent is vitally important. We know that that's true, and we will certainly have our hands full trying to execute on that project effectively.
We're also going to have the reality of a one-seat ride for a whole lot more communities and commuters, which only will add to the capacity demand for that capacity.
Your reaction to Alina Hava saying that she's opening up an investigation into you and Attorney General Matthew Platkin, any idea on what this is all about?
I addressed this at the end when it came out at the end of last week. No comment on the particulars of this, which you won't be surprised by given the nature of something like this. I would just say as a factual matter, we work with federal authorities across the board, including ICE, every single day. Our law enforcement at the state level, at the county and local level, is focused on bringing criminals to justice. And we work frequently with, as I say, our federal authorities, and quite successfully, including ICE. I mentioned last week, I'm not sure how much airtime I got, this is also personal to me. I host an annual summit dinner every year where we have our neighbors, Pennsylvania, Delaware, and New York. We have our senior folks in law enforcement, but we have immigration folks, AFT, FBI, U.S. Attorney, and by the way, not just from New Jersey or Newark. And by example, we'll have the FBI, Secret Service, FBI directors from Philadelphia and New York. So this is something we take really seriously. And there's been an element of this so-called immigrant trust directive, which has been upheld, by the way, in court, including by judges appointed by President Trump. It's got an element that doesn't get as much airtime that is worth ending on, which is it basically allows an individual, regardless of what their immigration status is, to feel free to approach public servants, including members of law enforcement, and basically say, that guy over there is the murderer you're looking for, the bank robber, the rapist you're looking for. That person is able to do that without any fear of their own status, which has been a huge game changer. If you speak to the members of the law enforcement leadership in our state, that sort of ability, that unburdening of that person to be able to say, you know what, that's your guy right over there, has been a huge step. And we are, because of that and a whole lot of other factors, we are by many measures the safest state in America, and that doesn't happen by accident. I want to thank Tony and Roger and Team Amtrak, Chris and Fran and Team NJ Transit for a very productive discussion. And Tony said it well, maybe not another summit like this before the summer, but elements of this team are meeting and speaking constantly, and that's what commuters out there deserve. Thank you all.